The Supreme Court stood cloaked in silence, its marble columns towering like sentinels as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped into the chamber. Outside, a fractured crowd roared competing chants that collided like war drums. "Our court, our voice, and respect the robes." Inside, the sharp echo of AOC's heels striking the polished floor felt like a countdown to detonation. Moments earlier, an anonymous email had reached every justice. "Stop her before she dismantles the court's legacy." As AOC took her place at the podium, the lights flickered, microphones hissed with static, and Justice Sotomayor leaned forward, her voice cold enough to freeze the air. "Congresswoman, this is not your stage." But AOC didn't flinch. Her eyes, steady and cutting, held the room hostage as she delivered 9 words that would fracture history. "This court serves the people, or it serves no one." In that heartbeat of stunned silence, it wasn't law that weighed on the chamber. It was power, realizing it had been challenged. The Supreme Court loomed against the pale blue of a Washington dawn, its marble columns cast in shadows that seemed heavier than the air itself. Fog curled low over the steps, thick enough to blur the edges of the crowd gathering outside. Voices rose and fell like waves, some chanting, "Our court, our voice," others snapping back with, "Respect the robes." Helicopter blades thumped overhead in a steady, menacing rhythm, the searchlight sweeping across a sea of signs, angry faces, and reporters gripping microphones as if they were lifelines. On the roof, red dots danced along the scopes of snipers, their rifles tracking the shifting mass below. Inside, a security camera panned slowly, catching brief flickers of movement. A clerk fumbling papers, a justice's aide whispering into a phone, her knuckles white against the receiver. In the lower hall, a paralegal stumbled, his leather folder splitting open as files scattered across the cold marble floor. A small black USB drive clattered to the ground and slid under a bench. No one noticed. No one except the janitor passing by with a mop, who crouched, picked it up, and slipped it into his pocket with a glance over his shoulder. He moved on, leaving only the faint squeak of his shoes in the silence. Somewhere deep in the building, the clip on that drive waited to explode. The grainy footage of a Supreme Court justice meeting in a dim restaurant with a lobbyist, the two of them leaning close as numbers and names spilled out like poison. Narration, a low whisper, "This isn't a hearing, it's a battleground, and history will remember who drew first blood." Across the city, a sleek black SUV slid through the quiet streets, headlights cutting through the fog. Inside sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. Her eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned a string of messages. Some supportive, most not. "Don't do this, Alex. It's political suicide," one text read. Another, "They'll destroy you before you even reach the steps." She exhaled slowly and tucked the phone away. Her playlist played faintly in one ear. Beethoven's Symphony, No. 7. But she yanked out the earbuds as the car slowed near the barricades. Through the tinted glass she saw them, a grandmother clutching a handwritten sign that said, "Speak for us," her free hand gripping her grandson's. On the opposite sidewalk, a man in a crisp suit barked into a megaphone, "She's turning the court into a circus." Flashbulbs popped from every angle as the SUV door opened. Reporters lunged forward. "Congresswoman, do you really think you're qualified to argue before the court? AOC, is this just a stunt?" She didn't answer, didn't blink. She stepped out, heels clicking against the stone in a rhythm almost too precise. Her white suit caught the morning light, and for a moment the chants softened. Not gone, just muted, like the hush before a storm breaks. "Ma'am, we're on edge today," whispered a security officer as he escorted her up the steps. His hand hovered near his earpiece. "Lot of chatter on the feeds. You may want to—" "I'm fine," AOC said, her voice level. Just open the door. The great bronze doors groaned as they swung inward. She crossed the threshold into the cavernous chamber where history had been written and erased countless times. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of wood polish and old paper. Sunlight stabbed through high windows in sharp beams, cutting across the gallery where reporters scribbled in notebooks and whispered into recording devices. At the far end, 9 black-robed justices sat in solemn formation, their faces half hidden in shadow. Chief Justice Roberts glanced up from his papers, his expression unreadable. Next to him, Justice Sotomayor. The silence didn't break as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tightened her fingers around the edges of the podium, the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing down on her. Beyond the chamber's thick doors, the world waited, restless, divided, and hungry for a spark. Her breath fogged faintly in the icy morning air, still clinging to her clothes, her white suit almost glowing under the harsh courtroom lights. Her heels leaving faint wet prints from snow tracked in on the marble floor. She slid a single earbud from her ear. Beethoven's Symphony No. 7 cutting off mid-rise, the final note lingering only in memory. Somewhere in the gallery, a phone vibrated violently against a wooden bench. The journalist who owned it glanced down, eyes narrowing as an anonymous notification appeared. If she speaks today, we leak the photos. He hesitated, thumb hovering over his screen, then looked back at her, as if measuring whether she could survive the coming storm. But AOC's eyes weren't on him. They were on the bench, on the 9 black-robed figures who embodied centuries of decisions that had shaped lives like hers, and broken them, too. Justice Sotomayor's gaze met hers, steady, unreadable, but there was something, a faint tension in the set of her jaw, a flicker of her fingers as they rested against a stack of briefs. Alexandria blinked once, and suddenly she was back in a dimly lit Bronx apartment where peeling paint flaked from the ceiling and the scurry of rats in the walls never stopped. She was 7, curled on her mother's lap, as headlights from the street stuttered across the cracked window pane. Her mother smelled of cheap detergent and exhaustion, but her voice had carried steel as she stroked her daughter's hair. "Mija," she whispered in Spanish, voice low but fierce. "If they don't give you a seat at the table, you flip the whole damn table over." Her mother's tears had been silent, but her grip unyielding, as though by holding her daughter close, she could will the world to treat her differently. The memory flickered away, replaced by the sterile chill of the Supreme Court. AOC's hands flexed once against the podium, as if she could still feel her mother's warmth there. She drew in a slow breath. The room was waiting for her to falter or to ignite. "Congresswoman," Chief Justice Roberts said finally, his voice cutting through the stillness like a scalpel, "you may proceed." She nodded once, just enough to acknowledge him without dropping her guard. "Thank you, Your Honor." Her voice was calm, but each word landed heavy in the silent chamber. At the edge of the gallery, a reporter lowered his pen just long enough to murmur to his colleague, "She's really going to do this. God help her." Outside, a cold wind whipped across the steps, rattling the barricades where protesters still surged and shouted. Police radios crackled with nervous updates. In the command van, parked 2 blocks away, an agent muttered, "Crowd swelling again. We may lose containment." Back inside, AOC's words began to flow, each sentence deliberate, carefully measured. But beneath the surface of her calm tone there was fire, the kind that could either warm a room or burn it to ashes. "Your Honors, I come before you not just as a member of Congress, but as someone who has seen firsthand the price of a system that forgets its people. In my district, voting lines that should take minutes stretch into hours. Neighborhoods are sliced apart by maps drawn with surgical cruelty, and every cut leaves scars that no court ruling has ever acknowledged." End quote. Sotomayor shifted slightly, her pen pausing over her notes. Across from her, Justice Alito's brow furrowed, his fingers steepled as he leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. The reporter's phone vibrated again. Another message. Last chance. Publish if she speaks again. His pulse quickened as he swiped the screen away and glanced at the marshals, standing rigid along the walls. Did they know? Would they care? AOC pressed on. This isn't abstract. It isn't hypothetical. These are real people, families, workers, students, who are being told year after year that their voices don't matter. And when the voices of the people are silenced, what remains of democracy? Objection, Justice Thomas said sharply, though this wasn't a trial. This is an argument, Congresswoman, not a speech. Keep it within legal bounds. AOC turned her head slightly toward him, not in defiance, but with the calm resolve of someone who had been told no 1,000 times and kept moving anyway. With respect, Your Honor, I am within legal bounds. The Constitution begins with 3 words: we, the, people. And yet, those words mean less and less if this court continues to allow maps that cut the people out of the process entirely. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Someone scribbled furiously in a notepad. Another leaned closer to the edge of his seat. Sotomayor's voice broke in then, quiet but edged with steel. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, this chamber is not the place for political theater. If you cannot focus your argument on the constitutional merits, we will be forced to— AOC interrupted gently, though the break in decorum sent a visible shiver through the room. With deep respect, Justice Sotomayor, wasn't it your own story, the Bronx, your diabetes, that shaped how you view justice? If personal experience informs a justice, why must it be irrelevant for the people you serve? The silence that followed was alive, crackling. Sotomayor's fingers curled slightly against her pen, knuckles whitening. Outside, the chants grew louder, as if the crowd sensed the invisible line being crossed within these walls. Somewhere in the building, a junior clerk glanced at a monitor showing the lobby. 2 unfamiliar men in dark suits stood there, one speaking urgently into a phone. The clerk swallowed hard, unease knotting in his gut. The reporter's phone buzzed again. He stared at the newest message, his throat dry, photos uploading. Countdown started. And as the seconds ticked by, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez straightened her back, her voice cutting through the static of fear and doubt. This court doesn't stand above the people. It stands because of them. And every decision you make here, every word written in these chambers, echoes into lives you'll never see. I'm here to remind you, they are watching too. A breath, a heartbeat, and the room, impossibly, seemed to hold even more stillness than before. The air in the Supreme Court felt heavier now, almost oppressive, as if the silence itself had weight and teeth. The faint hum of the overhead lights faltered, flickering once, then again, casting long, jagged shadows across the polished marble floor. A low hiss seeped through the speakers, static crawling like unseen fingers along the edges of the chamber. Somewhere near the doors, a clerk shivered and pulled his jacket tighter as a cold draft slithered through the room. No one spoke, not the reporters clutching their pens mid-air, not the aides standing rigid along the walls, and certainly not the 9 justices seated in their elevated chairs like immovable sentinels. Chief Justice Roberts broke the tension with a voice sharpened by decades of command, the sound reverberating off the high-vaulted ceiling. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you may proceed. His eyes didn't waver from her face, but there was a faint tightness in his jaw, a sign only the most seasoned court watchers would catch. Alexandria's hand hovered over her laptop as she drew a slow, measured breath. The podium felt colder than it had minutes ago, or maybe it was her fingers. She tapped the trackpad. The screen lit up, casting a glow against her determined features. Her eyes flicked to the notification bar and froze. A message stared back at her in stark, unfeeling text. "Your next words decide if you live to speak another day." Her pulse pounded loud in her ears, but her face betrayed nothing. She had learned long ago, in the streets of the Bronx and later in the halls of Congress, that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not here, not now. In the gallery, a reporter noticed the faint flicker of her screen. "Did you see that?" he whispered to his colleague, eyes narrowing. "What?" the other murmured back, not daring to glance up. Her laptop. There was something. The first reporter hesitated, thumb poised above the record button on his phone, a creeping sense of unease settling in his gut. "Congresswoman," Roberts prompted, a hint of impatience threading through his tone. "The court awaits your argument." Alexandria's fingers curled slightly, nails pressing into her palm as she steadied her breath. "Thank you, Chief Justice," she said, her voice clear, steady, but carrying an undercurrent that even she could feel. A taut wire stretched close to snapping. Justice Sotomayor's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied AOC from the bench. She didn't move, but her pen paused mid-note, and for the first time that morning she leaned forward a fraction, as if she sensed something unseen unfolding. A faint sound outside broke the tension for a split second. Shouts, louder than before. Protesters pressed against barricades in the streets, their chants battling each other like clashing waves. "Our court, our voice," rose strong, answered by a guttural, "Respect the robes." Police radios crackled. "We've got movement on the south side. Contain it. Repeat, contain it." Inside, Alexandria straightened her back, her white suit almost too bright in the dim chamber. "Your Honors," she began, her tone cutting clean through the layered silence, "the Constitution's first three words, we, the people, are not mere decoration. They are a promise. But today, millions of Americans are asking if that promise still applies to them." "Congresswoman," Justice Alito interjected, his voice cool, almost clinical, "we're here to discuss constitutional precedent, not public sentiment." "With respect, Justice Alito," AOC countered without hesitation, "precedent loses meaning when it no longer protects those it was meant to serve." There was a sharp intake of breath from the gallery. A young law student at the back clutched his pen so tightly it snapped. Sotomayor's fingers drummed once against her bench before she spoke, her tone deliberate. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, this chamber demands precision. Please keep your arguments within the legal framework." Alexandria's gaze locked onto hers. "Your Honor," she said, steady and firm, "was it not your own lived experience, the Bronx, your battles with diabetes, that shaped your understanding of justice? If such experiences can inform the bench, why must they be dismissed when voiced from the streets below it?" The words hung in the air like a live wire, sparking unspoken reactions. Sotomayor's eyes didn't leave hers, but her pen resumed its movement, slower now. Somewhere near the press section, a reporter's phone buzzed. He glanced down and felt his stomach drop. Another anonymous message. Countdown initiated. 30 minutes. His fingers hovered over his notepad. Publish? Wait? His pen moved anyway. AOC's voice grew stronger. "In my district, a grandmother waits 6 hours in line just to cast a vote, only to be told her precinct was redrawn. A student drives 2 counties over because her polling station vanished overnight. These are not abstractions, these are lives." "Congresswoman, you tread close to advocacy," Roberts warned, his tone edged. Alexandria's hands didn't shake. "Advocacy is speaking for those who cannot speak here themselves. Is that not what this chamber was created for?" In the shadows of the back hall, a clerk's radio hissed faintly. "We have 2 unknowns in restricted access. moving to intercept. An instant, AOC tapped her laptop again as her slide deck loaded, but her eyes flicked back to that earlier message. Your next words decide if you live to speak another day. For a split second, her heart hammered, loud enough to drown out every sound in the chamber. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes, not just those of the 9 justices, but the nation's. She lifted her gaze, jaw set. Then let these next words be heard not as noise, but as necessity. Democracy does not demand silence. It demands courage. There was no movement, not from the justices, not from the crowd. Even the clock's second hand seemed to hesitate. And somewhere unseen, a finger hovered over a send button, ready to unleash a storm. The tension in the Supreme Court chamber had thickened to the point where every breath felt measured, every sound amplified. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood poised at the podium, her fingers lightly resting on the edge, as if to ground herself in the gravity of the moment. Her voice cut through the silence, calm, yet carrying the weight of generations. This is not about the left or the right. This is about whether democracy survives this decade. The words echoed, bouncing off marble walls and sinking into the hearts of everyone present. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens frozen mid-air, as though afraid to miss even a syllable. Justice Alito shifted slightly, his gaze narrowing. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, I would caution you. This court deals in law, not doomsday rhetoric. AOC's eyes flicked toward him, steady and unwavering. With respect, Justice Alito, laws mean nothing if they exist in a democracy that no longer functions. What I'm describing is not rhetoric, it's reality. Outside, the protests swelled, chants growing louder, more unified. From beyond the thick doors came the rhythmic pounding of fists against barricades, the sound merging with sirens in the distance. Our court, our voice, they shouted. Police radios crackled with rising urgency. In a quiet corner of the court's IT room, a technician's screen began flashing red. A single word blinked ominously. Intrusion detected. We've got a breach, he muttered, hands flying over his keyboard. His supervisor leaned over his shoulder. What kind of breach? The tech's face paled. Someone's in the live stream system, and they're queuing a file. Back in the chamber, AOC pressed on. Your Honors, when the architecture of democracy is used to disenfranchise its very citizens, it's no longer a structure worth preserving, it's a cage. Justice Barrett looked up from her notes, her pen stilled. Are you suggesting this court has failed in its duty to protect constitutional principles? AOC's response came without hesitation. I'm suggesting that a duty ignored is as dangerous as one betrayed. The technician's screen flickered as the file's name appeared. Confidential _audio _record MP3. Oh, God, he whispered, panic rising. His supervisor's voice was sharp now. Pull the plug, kill the stream before it goes live. But his fingers froze. The hacker had already locked out admin controls. In the gallery, a young journalist turned to his colleague, whispering, Do you feel it? It's like the air changed. The other nodded, eyes never leaving AOC. Something's about to break. AOC's tone sharpened as she continued, her words precise. This isn't theoretical. In my district alone, thousands have been effectively erased from maps. Communities are silenced with surgical precision, lines drawn not in ink, but in intent. Justice Kavanaugh leaned forward slightly, his voice measured. Congresswoman, you speak with passion, but where is the precedent? Passion alone cannot guide the Constitution. Her jaw tightened, but her voice remained even. Precedent that enables injustice is no shield. It's a weapon turned against the people it was meant to protect. At that moment, in the IT room, the progress bar for the queued file reached 98%. The technician's hands hovered helplessly as the supervisor hissed, "If this leaks, the court's integrity is toast." Back in the chamber, a faint flicker ran across the large monitor usually reserved for exhibits. Justices exchanged quick, uncertain glances. AOC didn't look back. She kept her focus locked forward as though she could feel the shifting energy behind her. Justice Sotomayor's voice, calm but edged, cut through. "Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez, you tread close to contempt. Are you aware of the consequences?" Alexandria met her gaze evenly. "With the greatest respect, Justice Sotomayor, there are greater consequences for silence." The monitor blinked again. This time, faint static crackled through the chamber's speakers. Reporters stiffened, pens hovering. The technician whispered to himself, "It's starting." A voice, distorted but unmistakable, came over the speakers. "We hold the districts. Keep 'em red. If we lose them, the funding stops." Gasps erupted in the gallery. Justices shifted uncomfortably. Roberts gripped his gavel tight, but didn't strike. AOC stood still, her voice calm in the chaos. "Your Honors, this is the moment history will measure you by. Not your titles, not your robes, but your choices." The sound of pounding on the barricades outside grew louder, synced to the hammering hearts within the court. And the monitor blinked again, ready to reveal more. The static from the monitor faded, leaving the chamber thick with a silence so taut it seemed ready to snap. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's voice still lingered in the air, her final words like embers refusing to die. But before she could speak again, Justice Sotomayor's tone sliced through the tension like a blade drawn too quickly. "This is not the Bronx, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. In here, only the Constitution speaks." The words echoed with an icy precision, each syllable sharp enough to draw a reaction, even from seasoned journalists in the gallery. AOC's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the podium, her eyes never leaving Sotomayor's. Outside, the chants of protesters clashed with the shrill whine of police sirens. A helicopter circled overhead, its searchlights slicing through the winter haze. Amid the crush of bodies at the barricades, a figure moved differently, deliberate, calculated. The man's coat was too heavy for the mild cold, his pace too slow for someone caught in the swirl of protest. A police radio crackled, "Unknown male, south perimeter, possible concealed weapon, eyes on him." "Inside the court," Sotomayor continued, her voice cold steel over velvet, "this chamber is not a forum for political theater. We are guardians of precedent, not participants in spectacle. Restrain yourself." AOC's jaw tightened, but her voice remained measured, deliberate. "With respect, Your Honor, silence in the face of injustice has always been the most dangerous precedent." Justice Alito leaned back slightly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Congresswoman, you flirt with contempt for this court." AOC didn't blink. "I'm not here to court contempt. I'm here to confront it." In the IT room below, the technician's screen flashed again, a new message streaking across in red. "Second file queued, judicial_strategy_call MP4. His supervisor swore under his breath. "They're not stopping. Lock 'em out, now." But the technician's fingers trembled. "It's too late. The system's been hijacked." The chamber's monitor flickered, drawing uneasy glances from justices and clerks alike. The faint hiss of static teased at the edges of the room, a threat wrapped in white noise. Sotomayor's eyes bore into AOC's. "This court does not answer to crowds, Congresswoman. It answers to the Constitution. Do you understand the distinction?" Alexandria's reply came soft but cutting. "I understand that a constitution interpreted without context becomes a weapon, not a shield." Outside, the unknown man adjusted his scarf, his gloved hand brushing against the shape of something beneath his coat. Officers closed in, voices terse. "Sir, keep your hands visible. Do not move." but the man didn't stop. He took another step toward the inner barricade. Back in the chamber, Justice Kavanaugh's voice joined the fray, his tone almost conciliatory. "You speak of injustice, but courts cannot legislate compassion. That's Congress's role, is it not?" AOC's gaze shifted to him briefly, unwavering. "And when Congress is gerrymandered into irrelevance, who will protect the people then?" The monitor hissed louder, and for a fraction of a second, a blurry image appeared. A familiar Supreme Court justice, seated in a private dining room, speaking low to a man whose face was turned just out of frame. Reporters' pens flew across pages, and one murmured, "If that goes live." AOC's voice rose slightly, commanding but not shouting. "This court holds the power to decide who counts in democracy. But I ask, will you count the people or count them out?" Sotomayor's fingers curled tight around her pen. "Enough, Congresswoman." But Alexandria took one step closer to the podium, her tone unflinching. "Enough is what communities say when their voices are finally heard. Enough is what history demands when justice stalls." Outside, the man in the heavy coat stopped just feet from the barricade. One hand slipped into his pocket as an officer shouted, "Hands up, now!" And in the chamber, the monitor began to load the file's audio. "Proceed with redistricting as planned," a muffled voice said. "Donors won't wait." Gasps rippled through the room. Sotomayor's eyes darted to the monitor, then back to AOC. For the first time, her voice faltered, not in volume, but in certainty. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, tread carefully." AOC's reply came like a whisper sharpened into a blade. "Your Honor, it's not I who should tread carefully. It's power." The chamber felt like it was holding its breath, every pair of eyes shifting between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Justice Sotomayor. The faint static still hummed from the monitor like a warning too quiet to ignore. AOC's gaze was unyielding now, her voice low but sharp enough to draw blood. "Justice Sotomayor, wasn't it your Bronx story, the nights of sirens outside your window, your mother working double shifts, that shaped the legal philosophy you're revered for? So why deny that same humanity to the people standing outside these walls?" Her words landed heavy, sending a ripple through the marble chamber. Even Robert's gavel hand faltered slightly, as if unsure whether to intervene. Sotomayor's jaw tightened. She shifted in her chair but didn't speak immediately, her eyes narrowing with something caught between anger and memory. Reporters in the gallery scribbled furiously. One leaned toward another and whispered, "She's hitting personal. This is dangerous." Outside, the chants were louder now, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the winter sky. The figure in the heavy coat still hovered near the barricade, his gloved hand brushing his side as if testing the weight of something unseen. Police radios crackled, subject stationary, units standing by. Back in the courtroom, AOC pressed forward, her words gaining momentum. "Your life, Your Honor, was shaped by personal experience. You've spoken about how those experiences informed your understanding of justice. Are you suggesting those stories only matter when they're yours?" Sotomayor's fingers twitched, the pen in her grasp threatening to snap. Her voice was cool but thinner now. "Congresswoman, this court cannot be guided by sentiment. It must be guided by the Constitution." AOC's tone was calm, measured, but the edges were honed like a blade. "Then perhaps the Constitution must be reminded of the people it was written for." The monitor behind her flickered suddenly, static giving way to faint movement. In the IT room below, the technician's screen flashed crimson, playback initiated. "Unable to abort." His supervisor's voice was a hiss. "What's going out?" Back in the chamber, a male voice, confident, careless, filled the speakers. "Keep the districts red. If not, funding dries up." Gasps swept through the room like a gust of cold air. Reporters froze, fingers trembling over keyboards. Clerks exchanged wide-eyed glances. Justice Alito shifted uncomfortably, his hand gripping the edge of his bench. AOC didn't turn to the monitor. She kept her gaze fixed on Sotomayor. This is not just about maps or laws. It's about power, choosing winners and losers in a democracy it claims to protect. Outside, the unknown man's hand slipped fully into his coat pocket as officers shouted, "Freeze! Hands where we can see them," protesters screamed, the chaos threatening to surge past the barricades. Sotomayor's voice was quieter now, but no less pointed. "You are attempting to drag this court into the streets, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. That is not our role." Alexandria stepped closer to the podium, her words cutting through the murmurs in the gallery. "Your Honor, the streets are already here. They're pounding on these doors, not because they disrespect the law, but because they've been abandoned by it." The monitor repeated the chilling words, louder this time. "Keep the districts red. If not, the funding ends." A reporter whispered under his breath, "This is it. This is the moment." Sotomayor exhaled slowly, her pen lowering to the desk. For the first time since the proceedings began, her eyes flickered, not with defiance, but with doubt. And still, AOC didn't relent. Justice is not born from silence or tradition alone. It comes from the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, even when they demand more from us than we are ready to give. Outside, boots pounded against the steps as officers moved in on the suspect. "We have a visual, possible weapon. Engage on command." Inside, Robert's gavel hovered mid-air, but remained suspended. The chamber seemed caught in a breathless standoff between power and principle. And AOC's voice, calm yet deadly certain, echoed through it all. "The world is watching, not to see if this court will follow the law, but to see if it still remembers why the law exists." The monitor screen stuttered once more, loading yet another file. The courtroom waited as though bracing for the next blow. The courtroom air was dense, a weight pressing on every chest, as if the marble walls themselves demanded silence. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood still at the podium, her hands resting lightly but her knuckles pale. Her eyes were focused, but somewhere behind them, memory flared. Bronx. Winter. The scream of a child, splitting the night like glass shattering on concrete. She had been there, watching from across the street as federal agents dragged a man from his home, his daughter clutching his leg with all the strength her tiny body could summon. "Please, don't take my daddy," the girl sobbed, her voice raw and cracking. The man, her father, had looked back only once, mouthing words AOC could never forget. "Protect her." Then the van door slammed. Silence returned to the street, heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. AOC blinked, pulling herself back to the present. The gallery watched her with bated breath, cameras flashing intermittently, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Her voice, when it came, was low, but carried through the room with deliberate precision. "Your Honors, every legal decision made in this chamber does not float harmlessly in theory. It lands hard, on real streets, in real homes, breaking real families apart." Justice Gorsuch's brow furrowed slightly. "Congresswoman, this court is not unsympathetic, but it cannot operate on anecdotal evidence. Constitutional law requires—" She cut him off gently but firmly. "It requires courage, too. The Constitution was never meant to be sterile. It was written in the messy, painful lives of people fighting to be heard." In the control room, the technician's monitor flashed a new alert. Playback cued. Emergency redistricting. PP3. His hands hovered over the keyboard. "They're doing it again," he murmured. His supervisor only shook his head, eyes fixed on the live feed. Outside, the crowd's chants reached a fever pitch. The unknown man in the heavy coat was still there, standing unnervingly still as officers inched closer. A voice barked over police radios. "Subject refuses to comply. Preparing to engage." Back inside, AOC's words hardened. "I saw a man deported in front of his daughter because lines on a map made her neighborhood invisible to the people who draw them. You can call it precedent. She calls it losing everything." Justice Barrett looked up slowly from her notes. "Are you asking us to weigh human suffering against constitutional boundaries?" Alexandria's eyes flicked to her, unwavering. "I'm asking you to admit that every decision you make already does." The monitor behind her stuttered, static flickering before a voice filled the chamber. Calm, detached, and devastating. "Keep the districts red, otherwise our donors cut the funding. Understood?" A gasp swept through the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched wildly, and one muttered, "This just went from historic to explosive." AOC didn't turn. She stood firm, her voice steady though her chest burned with the weight of memory. "You hear that? That's not passion. That's reality clawing at these walls, demanding to be let in." Justice Sotomayor's fingers flexed slightly on her pen. For the first time, she looked less like a judge and more like the girl from the Bronx, staring at an impossible choice. The unknown man outside shifted. Officers shouted, "Hands! Show your hands!" But he didn't move. The crowd screamed as a flare arced overhead, painting the marble steps in blood-red light. Inside, AOC's voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it filled the room. "Every time this court chooses abstraction over action, it chooses who gets to matter and who doesn't. Is that justice or convenience?" The monitor crackled again, the voice repeating, "Keep the districts red. Funding ends if we fail." Chief Justice Roberts raised his gavel but hesitated, his lips pressing into a tight line. The room held still, even breathless, as if history itself were waiting for the sound of wood on wood. And AOC's eyes, sharp as glass yet burning with an ache unhidden, swept the bench. "You don't have to live in the Bronx to know the cost of silence. You only have to listen." A muffled commotion erupted beyond the chamber doors, the sound of boots pounding against marble, radios crackling with static-laced commands. The energy in the room coiled tighter, like a spring ready to snap. The chamber had gone unnaturally still, the kind of silence that made even the sound of a pen clicking seem like a gunshot. Sotomayor's eyes, dark and unflinching, locked onto Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez like a predator testing its prey. Her voice came low, deliberate, each word landing with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Are you proposing, Congresswoman, that this court abandon fairness in pursuit of mere empathy?" The question hovered in the air like a blade suspended by a single thread. It wasn't just a question, it was a trap, carefully laid and razor-sharp. AOC didn't flinch. She inhaled slowly, her fingers tightening slightly on the podium's edge. Her voice, when it came, was calm but carried an undercurrent of defiance that seemed to resonate off the marble walls. "I propose," she said steadily, "that we abandon indifference in pursuit of justice." A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, their eyes darting between the Congresswoman and the justice, as though witnessing a duel that had been centuries in the making. A young law clerk near the back whispered under his breath, "She turned it. She actually turned it." Outside, the shouting grew louder. Police radios barked, "Subject near West Barricade refuses to stand down. Possible weapons sighted. Orders?" A flare burst in the sky moments later, casting an eerie red glow across the courthouse steps. The chaos pressed close, threatening to spill through the ornate doors. Sotomayor's fingers tapped once on her bench, her face unreadable, but her eyes flashing with something raw. Justice cannot be administered by emotion alone. It must be tempered by the principles that built this very institution. AOC leaned in slightly, her words gaining weight. And yet, principles untempered by the lived reality of those they govern become weapons for the privileged. Justice without humanity is not justice, it's machinery. The monitor flickered again behind her. The technician in the control room cursed softly as another unauthorized file queued up. Final warning _ transcript DP3 glared in bold red on his screen. "It's going live. I can't stop it," he whispered. A distorted voice filled the speakers, calm yet dripping with quiet menace. "Keep the lines, keep the seats, or lose everything." Judgmental, radiant. The words were met with gasps, the sound ricocheting through the chamber. Justices exchanged tense glances. Roberts shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting but not moving on the gavel. "Michael?" AOC's gaze swept the bench, her voice now quieter but no less potent. "Your Honors, I don't ask for rulings rooted in sentiment. I ask for rulings rooted in courage, the courage to see that law is only as noble as the lives it protects." Justice Barrett finally spoke, her tone measured. "You are challenging more than precedent, Congresswoman. You're challenging the very foundation of judicial restraint." Alexandria's reply was immediate, her voice unshaken. "Perhaps restraint is only virtuous when it restrains power, not justice." Outside, the chaos escalated. Officers shouted commands as protesters surged forward. "Perimeter breach imminent," barked a radio. The unknown man in the heavy coat took another step toward the barricades, his hand still buried in his pocket. Back in the courtroom, Sotomayor's jaw tightened. Her next words came slower, tinged with something heavier than before. "Do you believe this court has grown indifferent, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez?" The room held its breath. AOC's eyes didn't waver. "I believe indifference happens not all at once, but decision by decision, until those outside these walls no longer recognize the institution meant to protect them." The clerk seated near Sotomayor shifted uneasily. Reporters leaned closer, pens scratching faster as the exchange deepened into territory few imagined possible. The monitor stuttered once more. The recording continued. "Hold the districts. Red is non-negotiable. The funding will follow." Gasps rippled again, louder this time. A young journalist whispered, "This is historic and dangerous." His colleague replied, "This isn't just law anymore, it's war." AOC's voice sliced through the rising murmur, soft but unyielding. "The people are not abstractions. They bleed, they lose, and every decision here either protects their place in democracy or erases it." The gavel in Robert's hand trembled slightly, but he still didn't strike. The weight of history pressed down on the room, as if the marble itself had grown heavier. Sotomayor leaned back slightly, her face a mask but her eyes betraying a flicker of something. Doubt, or perhaps a memory she could not suppress. The pounding on the chamber doors echoed louder now, mixing with the chants outside. The sound felt less like protest and more like a warning. The chamber's silence was deafening, the kind that made every rustle of paper sound amplified, every whispered breath feel like a scream. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood rooted to the podium, her hands gripping the edge as if she could anchor herself against the storm brewing both outside and within. She didn't see the court clerk approach until a folded slip of paper was slid discreetly onto the podium's surface. His hand lingered a second too long, trembling just slightly before he stepped back into the shadows. No one else seemed to notice. AOC's eyes dropped to the note, in hurried handwriting, barely legible. "Get out now. They know your route home." Her pulse kicked up, but her face betrayed nothing. She folded the paper once more and tucked it into her sleeve, as if it were merely another piece of evidence for the record. Behind her, the monitor flickered again, static stuttering like a warning cough. The technician in the control room muttered under his breath, "They're overwriting everything. We've lost total control." His supervisor swore, gripping the console's edge. This isn't just a leak, it's coordinated. Outside, the chaos escalated. Protesters pressed harder against barricades. Officers shouted commands. "Subject confirmed armed. Contain him, now!" A flash of movement, a scream, and then a muffled crack. The sound rippled through the crowd and seemed to seep under the thick wooden doors. Back inside, Sotomayor's gaze hadn't left AOC. Her tone carried an edge so precise it almost cut. "Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I urge you to remember where you are. This is a court of law, not a stage for political spectacle." AOC's reply was steady, her voice quiet but rich with defiance. "And yet every decision made here plays out on the stage of real lives, Your Honor. If you have any doubt, listen to what Your Honor heard on her FBI record, because it led her deeper into her heart." Another flicker on the monitor. The blurred image of two figures appeared, a Supreme Court justice and a party leader seated at a private table, their conversation faint but audible now. "We hold the districts. If she speaks again, shut it down. All of it." Gasps swept the gallery. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances as fingers flew over keyboards. AOC didn't turn. Her eyes remained locked on the bench, her voice tightening as she spoke. "It seems, Your Honors, the people are not the only ones knocking." Roberts's fingers hovered over the gavel, but he didn't bring it down. The weight in the room was unbearable, like the air had thickened into glass. The clerk who had slipped her the note reappeared at the side door, his face pale, eyes darting nervously toward her. He mouthed silently, "Leave, now." AOC's hands tightened on the podium. Her chest rose with a deep breath, her next words measured like steps over broken glass. "The power of this court does not come from robes. It does not come from marble columns or rituals." Outside, the crowd roared again as officers shouted orders. A second crack echoed, closer this time. Radios hissed. "Perimeter breach imminent. Protect key personnel." AOC's voice grew stronger, each syllable deliberate, resonating off the walls as if demanding to be remembered. "It comes from the people, and the people are knocking." The gallery erupted, not in cheers, but in the stunned silence of a collective realization. Reporters typed furiously. One whispered to his neighbor, "This isn't just testimony anymore. It's a reckoning." "Whoa!" On the monitor, the distorted voice spoke again, now clearer, colder. "Keep her quiet, or funding dies with her words." The clerk stepped back into the shadows, his face vanishing into the dimness. AOC didn't move. She didn't blink. Sotomayor shifted slightly in her seat, her hand gripping her pen so tightly it trembled. Roberts's gavel wavered above the block, frozen mid-air. And outside, the pounding on the barricades synced with the pounding of hearts inside the chamber. The muffled thud from the parking lot reverberated faintly through the marble floors, a sound too sharp for a car door, too hollow for gunfire. Someone whispered in the gallery. Was that a flare or a warning? Outside, red light pulsed against the courthouse facade, the reflection stretching long and distorted like blood seeping across white stone. Inside, time felt suspended. Every eye in the room turned between AOC's unflinching posture and Sotomayor's suddenly softened expression. The justice's fingers tightened around her pen before she spoke, voice quieter than expected, almost as if meant for no one but the woman standing before her. "You remind me of myself." AOC didn't respond immediately. Her eyes searched Sotomayor's, and for a fleeting moment the defiance in her face gave way to something else. recognition. Outside, police radios crackled over the din. Unidentified device confirmed West Lot. Evacuate all non-essentials. Repeat, non-essentials out, now. Officers moved fast, boots pounding on concrete as panicked shouts rose from the crowd pressed against barricades. Back in the chamber, Sotomayor shifted slightly in her chair. I fought my way out of the Bronx, believing law could be an equalizer, she said, her words low, deliberate. But sitting here, I wonder how much of that was illusion. AOC's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of what she was hearing. Illusions don't change lives, Justice, but courage does. The gallery held its collective breath. A journalist's hand hovered over her keyboard, waiting, unsure whether to capture the moment or simply witness it. Outside, another thud rattled through the air, closer this time. Officers yelled over radios. Secondary blast or distraction device. Teams advancing. A ripple of unease spread, even inside, clerks glancing nervously at each other, their pens stilled. Sotomayor exhaled, her knuckles pale as they gripped the bench. Do you know how many nights I lay awake as a young attorney, certain I could burn the system down and rebuild it fairer? Her lips twitched in a near smile. And now I sit here, wondering if the system burned me instead. AOC leaned forward slightly. Maybe the system doesn't need burning. Maybe it needs reminding. The faint crackle of static hummed from the courtroom speakers, the hacker's interference still lurking like a predator circling its prey. Behind her, the monitor flickered, teasing with another half-glimpsed file name. Judicial Compromise _Final, MP3. One of the marshals standing near the exit door shifted uneasily, his hand hovering near his radio. Another clerk whispered to his colleague, "This isn't a hearing anymore, it's something else." Sotomayor's gaze flicked briefly to Roberts, then back to AOC. Her next words carried a fragility that shocked the room. You're forcing me to remember why I wanted this robe, and I don't know if I thank you or resent you for that. AOC's reply was soft but unwavering. You don't have to thank me, Justice. You just have to decide. Outside, the chanting surged louder, unified now, echoing like a single voice demanding entry. We won't be erased. We won't be erased. The gavel in Robert's hand trembled slightly, but he still didn't strike. The weight of the room bore down on everyone present, even the air heavy with expectation. Another distant boom rattled the glass in the chamber windows. This time, no one dared speculate whether it was a flare or a threat. AOC straightened, her voice carrying across the chamber with a calm that felt more dangerous than shouting. The people are no longer asking for permission to exist. They're demanding it. And they're watching to see if this court is still capable of hearing them. Sotomayor's fingers loosened on her pen. For the first time in the session, her shoulders slumped slightly, not in defeat, but in something far more complicated. And somewhere beyond the barricades, a child's voice broke through the chanting, high and piercing. Don't let them forget us. The quiet of Sotomayor's chambers felt suffocating after the roaring chaos outside. She stood by the window, her hand resting on the cold glass as distant flashes from the parking lot painted the skyline red. Her phone vibrated on the desk. She didn't want to answer, but her fingers moved on their own, lifting it to her ear. The voice on the other end was smooth, unhurried, yet every word felt laced with venom. She wins, Sonia, and when she does, we all lose. Sotomayor didn't reply at first. Her eyes followed the faint outline of riot police forming lines near the courthouse steps. Is that a threat or a prophecy? She said finally, her tone neutral but edged with steel. The lobbyist chuckled softly. Call it what you want. You know how fragile this house of cards is. If her words today light a spark, it burns us all, judges, donors, every last person who's kept the machine running. Sotomayor's fingers tightened on the phone. Maybe the machine deserves to burn. There was silence on the other end, then a low sigh. I'm not here to moralize, Sonia. I'm here to remind you of reality. If the people believe the court is political, they'll tear it apart. But if they see division within these walls, it'll happen twice as fast. Her eyes drifted to the photo on her desk. Her mother holding a young Sonia on a Bronx stoop, their faces weathered but determined. And you think keeping quiet preserves integrity? I think a crack in marble spreads fast. One congresswoman can't topple an institution, but she can make people think they can. You know I'm right. She said nothing, only exhaled sharply through her nose. The lobbyist's voice lowered. You've held this line for years, Sonia. Don't let one moment of doubt rewrite your legacy. You're the conscience of the court. Act like it. In the gallery above the chamber, a journalist sent another update. Sources say private talks among justices are fracturing. Sotomayor unusually quiet. His editor texted back, "Keep digging. Find out why." Back outside, the man in the heavy coat remained frozen near the barricades. Officers barked orders. "Hands visible. This is your last warning." In the Supreme Court's IT room, the technician's screen flashed a new notification. Auto-stream upload confirmed. Judicial integrity _leak PMP 4. His supervisor cursed. "What now?" Sotomayor turned from the window. "What happens if I don't act?" she asked softly, more to herself than the voice on the phone. The lobbyist's answer was blunt. "Then the machine grinds you up, too." She ended the call without another word, setting the phone down as if it burned her hand. For a long moment she stared at her reflection in the polished wood of her desk. She didn't see a justice. She saw Sonia from the Bronx, holding her mother's grocery bags up 6 flights of stairs, dreaming of changing the world. Then a knock broke the silence. A clerk's nervous voice filtered through the door. "Justice Sotomayor? Chief Justice Roberts is asking for you in the conference room. They're discussing next steps." She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the photo once more. Outside, the chanting was louder, unified now into one demand. "We won't be erased." Sotomayor straightened her robe and walked toward the door. The doors of the Supreme Court swung open with a heavy groan, letting in a rush of cold air and the muffled roar of the crowd outside. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez watched from behind the tall windows. Her reflection stared back at her. Part judge, part young girl from the Bronx who once dreamed of changing everything. "She's doing what I used to believe was possible," she whispered to no one. The girl's mother finally reached them, her face stricken with fear. "I'm so sorry, Congresswoman. She just ran." AOC shook her head gently. "No need to apologize. She's braver than most people I've met in there today." She stood, smoothing her coat as she handed the child back to her trembling mother. Around them, the crowd surged with renewed energy. The chants grew louder, unified. "We won't be a race." Their voices reverberated off the marble steps, rising like a tide that threatened to wash away centuries of silence. A reporter near the front shouted over the noise, "Congresswoman, what's your next move?" AOC didn't pause as she walked toward her waiting car, but her words carried back to them with startling clarity. "The next move isn't mine, it's theirs. The people are awake now." As she reached the car, her aide handed her a phone. The screen was flooded with notifications, texts, emails, missed calls. At the top was a message in all caps. "Security alert. Route home compromised. Evacuate immediately." She glanced at it briefly before locking the screen and slipping the phone into her pocket. "Drive. she said, calmly. Inside the vehicle, silence enveloped her for the first time in hours. But outside, the protests raged on, their voices carrying into every street, every phone, every home. And in the Supreme Court, justices sat in tense silence, aware that the weight of their next decision had never felt heavier. The child's words echoed in AOC's mind as the car pulled away. "Don't let them erase us." The office felt cavernous in its silence, the marble and mahogany that once signaled authority now pressing in like a tomb. Sotomayor sat alone at her desk, the blinds half drawn, faint slashes of city lights painting the floor in pale gold. Her fingers traced the edges of a framed photograph, her mother, standing tall despite tired eyes, holding Sonia's tiny hand on a cracked Bronx sidewalk. She remembered the warmth of that hand, how it had felt like the anchor of her world. Her voice broke the stillness, a whisper too fragile for anyone but the woman in the photo. "Don't ever forget where you came from." The words hovered in the room like incense, heavy and lingering. She closed her eyes, and for a moment the sounds from the courtroom returned unbidden. The gavel's hesitant pause, the gallery's collective inhale, and the Congresswoman's voice slicing through the air like a blade. "It comes from the people, and the people are knocking." A soft knock at her own door made her flinch. "Justice Sotomayor?" The clerk's voice was tentative. "Chief Justice Roberts is asking if you're ready for deliberations." "I'll be there," she said, her voice steady though her grip on the photo frame tightened. As the clerk's footsteps receded, she set the frame down carefully, as though afraid to shatter not the glass but the memory inside. Her reflection caught in the glass showed a face older, more lined, yet in her eyes flickered the same fire that once burned in a young law student's chest. Her phone vibrated, breaking her reverie. She glanced at the screen, another message from the lobbyist. "One vote. Hold the line." She silenced it without reading further. Her gaze drifted again to the photo. "Mama," she murmured in Spanish, the syllables soft, almost reverent. "Did I fight hard enough? Or did I get lost in the fight?" In the chamber below, voices rose again. Protesters chanted, their sound carrying even through the thick glass. "We won't be erased!" The words vibrated in her chest like a distant drumbeat. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the doubt she had buried under layers of precedent and robes. "Maybe we've all forgotten," she whispered, barely audible. Forgotten who the law was meant to serve. A second knock, firmer this time. "Justice Sotomayor, they're waiting." She stood slowly, adjusting her robe, her hand brushing over the photo one last time. Her mother's eyes seemed to meet hers through the decades, fierce and unyielding. She whispered again, more to herself than to anyone else. "Don't ever forget." And as she walked toward the door, the sound of chanting outside seemed to grow louder, not just from the streets, but from somewhere deeper, echoing against the walls of her own memory. The car moved in silence, its tinted windows shielding Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from the chaos still pulsing outside the Supreme Court. She stared out as flashing lights cut across the foggy night, her fingers drumming against her knee in a rhythm as tense as her breath. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, the screen lighting up with a blocked number. She hesitated, then swiped to answer. "This is Ocasio-Cortez." The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and unmistakably familiar. "Congresswoman," Sotomayor began, her tone devoid of the judicial steel she wielded hours earlier, "you made me remember why I sat in that chair in the first place. That doesn't happen often." AOC's brow furrowed as she shifted in her seat. "Justice Sotomayor?" "Yes." A pause. "I wasn't calling to argue. I was calling because I think you might be right. And I don't know what that means for me." Alexandria's grip on the phone tightened. She could hear the faint sound of chanting through Sotomayor's end of the line. Proof that even within her chambers, the roar of the people was unavoidable. "You don't owe me anything, Justice," AOC said softly. "But maybe you owe yourself the chance to decide whose side of history you're on." Sotomayor exhaled slowly. "It's strange. All these years I believed I was on the right side just by being here. But power makes you forget." Alexandria's voice remained steady. "Then it's time to remember." Another silence. This one heavier, almost sacred. Then Sotomayor spoke again, her words quieter but clearer, like someone stepping out of shadow. "The others want to hold the line. I can feel it. But maybe it's time for a break in the marble. Maybe that's how the light gets in." The car turned sharply, jostling AOC from her thoughts as her aide looked back nervously. "We're rerouting. Security flagged a risk on your usual street." Alexandria nodded but didn't break her focus on the call. Sotomayor's voice faltered, tinged with something uncharacteristic. "Vulnerability? I don't know how this ends. I just know the old way isn't working anymore." "It ends," Alexandria said quietly, "when people like you decide it's time to listen again." Another pause, then Sotomayor whispered, "Maybe I already have." The line went dead. The silence in the car was thick now. Her aide tried to speak, but Alexandria raised a hand. She stared at her phone screen, at the simple words, "Call ended," and let out a slow breath. Outside, the crowd's chants echoed louder than ever. "We won't be. Erase." And for the first time all night, Alexandria allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile, not of victory, but of resolve. The first wave hit within minutes. Twitter timelines flooded with clips of AOC standing in the Supreme Court, her voice steady as the walls seemed to tremble. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hashtag We the People. Hashtag AOC VSC SCOTUS. Hashtag Don't Erase Us. Millions watched the footage on loop. The moment she told the justices, "The power of this court doesn't come from robes, it comes from people." And people are knocking. Screens lit up in dorm rooms, cafes, subway cars. A law student in Chicago tweeted, "Today, justice found its voice, and it sounded like the Bronx." The post racked up 400K retweets in under an hour. CNN's Chiron read, "Historic clash or political theater, America reacts." Meanwhile, Fox News aired a panel debating whether AOC's words were dangerously populist or necessary disruption. On TikTok, teenagers lip-synced her speech, while protest videos played in the background. One clip, a slow zoom of her kneeling to the child outside the courthouse, crossed 10 million views before sunset. Inside the Supreme Court, Sotomayor scrolled silently through the viral storm on her phone. Her aide asked cautiously, "Does it change anything?" Sotomayor didn't look up. It already has. The room was packed, not with marble statues and robed justices this time, but with ordinary people, workers, students, families clutching handwritten signs. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood at the small podium in the Bronx Community Center, where she once volunteered, the air thick with expectation. Cameras from every major network lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like steady heartbeats. She gripped the microphone, her voice calm but edged with fire. "The court has power, but the people are unstoppable." A hush swept through the crowd, broken only by the distant sound of sirens outside. She didn't flinch. "They can draw lines on maps, they can write opinions in books, but they cannot erase voices. Not here. Not now." From the front row, a young girl whispered to her mother, "She's talking for us." Alexander's gaze swept the crowd. This isn't about left or right. It's about whether we choose fear or freedom. And I'll tell you this, the Bronx doesn't choose fear. Applause erupted, rolling through the hall like a wave breaking loose. Phones rose high, recording every word as hashtags began climbing once more. The Supreme Court's conference room was thick with tension, the sound of pen scratching paper the only sign of life among the justices. Sotomayor sat apart from the others, her robe heavy across her shoulders as she wrote with deliberate strokes. Each word bled onto the page like a release valve for years of restrained conviction. Justice requires closeness, not isolation. To interpret without listening is to decide without understanding. Her colleagues watched from the corner of their eyes, some exchanging tight glances. Roberts cleared his throat but said nothing, sensing this was no moment to interrupt. Sotomayor paused, staring at her reflection in the polished wood table, seeing not a justice, but the girl from the Bronx. Her mother had raised to fight. Across the room, a clerk whispered to another, "She's dissenting, but it feels like more than that." Sotomayor pressed her pen to paper again, the final sentence crisp and certain. The marble of this institution should not be a fortress. It must be a bridge. She signed her name, the ink drying like a seal of defiance. Outside, the chants grew louder, as if the people already sensed the shift inside the marble walls. The Bronx Community Center was quieter now, the echoes of applause still clinging to the faded walls. OSC knelt to tie her coat, her fingers still shaking slightly from the speech that had set social media ablaze. She didn't notice the little girl at first, until a small hand tugged at her sleeve. Wide-eyed and timid, the child looked up. "Can I be like you someday?" Alexandria's expression softened, and she crouched so they were eye to eye. Her voice, steady yet tender, carried the weight of generations. "No, Querida." The girl's face fell slightly, but AOC continued before the silence could settle. "You'll be better, stronger, louder, because every time they try to close the door, you'll knock louder." The girl blinked, then smiled, small but radiant. Around them, phones recorded the moment, and within minutes it began spreading like wildfire. A reporter whispered to his colleague, "That's not just a soundbite, that's a spark." Outside, the chants hadn't stopped. They were louder now, pounding against the courthouse walls as if the people themselves had become an unstoppable drumbeat. The marble chamber felt different now. It wasn't just the residual echoes of protest outside or the viral images plastered across every news feed. It was in the air itself, charged, alive, like the first crackle of a storm. In the next session, Justice Sotomayor leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the bench. Her eyes scanned the attorney before her, but there was something new in her voice, a weight that wasn't there before. "Counsel," she said calmly but firmly, "before we analyze precedent, tell me this. How does your argument account for the lives of those who've been forgotten by this system?" The question rippled through the courtroom. Attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. The gallery leaned in, a murmur breaking across the rows. Even Chief Justice Roberts shifted in his seat, his gavel motionless in his hand. The lawyer hesitated, caught off guard. "Your Honor, respectfully, this is a question of constitutional interpretation, not—" Sotomayor's tone sharpened, cutting through his words. "The Constitution does not exist in a vacuum. It was written for people, and people live with the consequences of our decisions every day." Outside, chants still echoed faintly through the heavy doors. But inside, the silence now carried something heavier than tradition. It carried expectation. Would the court at last listen? Or would marble return to being just stone? The courthouse steps were empty now, the echo of protest chants replaced by a haunting stillness. Snow fell lightly, dusting the marble columns and softening the scars of a battle fought not with fists, but with words. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood across the street, her hands deep in the pockets of her coat, eyes fixed on the imposing facade of the Supreme Court. The glow from within flickered faintly through the tall windows, like a heartbeat struggling against the cold. She exhaled, the breath misting in front of her as she whispered to no one and everyone at once, "Truth doesn't destroy, it heals, but only if we let it." Behind those windows, she knew the justices were deliberating, their voices low, measured, carrying the weight of generations. She imagined Sotomayor's face, no longer a mask of marble but something human again, wrestling with doubt, conviction, and possibility. A car passed slowly, its headlights slicing through the quiet. Across the street, a small child stood holding her mother's hand, staring up at the court as if trying to understand its power. Alexandria's eyes softened. Somewhere deep inside, she wondered, not if they had won, but what winning truly meant in a world still trembling with questions. The sound was soft at first, barely more than a vibration against the heavy oak door. But it came again, louder now. 3 deliberate knocks that echoed through the quiet chambers. Sotomayor looked up from her desk, pen poised above a document she had yet to sign. Outside, the last traces of sunlight clung to the horizon. The marble of the court bathed in a warm, fleeting glow. For a moment, she didn't move, her eyes fixed on the door as if measuring the weight of what waited beyond it. Somewhere deep in the building, the distant murmur of clerks and aides hinted that life had resumed its steady rhythm. But here in this room, time held still. She thought of the girl from the Bronx she used to be, of a congresswoman standing unshaken at the podium, of voices chanting through snow and tear gas. The knock came a third time, deliberate and steady, as if to remind her that silence was no longer an option. Outside, the crowd had gone home, but their words lingered, imprinted on the stone like a promise. The narrator's voice settled like a whisper into the air, carrying the weight of centuries. Democracy isn't inherited, it's defended, one argument at a time. This story isn't just a reminder, it's a siren. Democracy's true strength isn't in marble halls, but in voices daring to shatter the silence. AOC's defiance, Sotomayor's reckoning. Together they lit a fuse. But every silence feeds the darkness. Every voice, or lack of it, becomes a weapon. For me, it's no longer a choice. Justice demands more than witnesses. It demands warriors. We either knock louder, or history will seal the door and bury us in the silence we chose. When the knock comes, will you open it or stay frozen as the world burns outside? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.